A big issue with the future of the internet is how companies will handle the massive amounts of data that's given to them each day through web interactions. In particular, social networks receive an unimaginable amount of data every day, and we're starting to look at how companies are handling that. And a few companies have admitted to using their user data and almost experimenting on their users to get even more data. And it's definitely a tricky line to balance on. There's a lot of ethics that go into how companies handle the data and what they decide to do that will definitely affect the future of the internet. I'm actually arguing against the experimentation and the manipulation of user data. I do understand that companies like OkCupid and Facebook, who both have admitted to experimenting, I know that they just want to improve their sites to help drive traffic, but experimenting on user data really shouldn't be the way that you go about doing that. If they had simply asked for consent, then I don't think it would be as big of an issue. It's the fact that neither of them explicitly say, hey, we want to experiment on you, and maybe do some like psychological stuff. But they just went ahead and did it anyway. Facebook makes matters worse by actually publishing their findings in an academic journal, and that actually violates academic policies on so many levels. I don't think the terms and conditions should count as consent, which is what Facebook claimed. And definitely, like, it may be a bit different for OkCupid because it's a dating website, and they obviously need to perfect their algorithms for matchmaking, but there has to be more ethical ways of doing that. I guess I was thinking, why not periodically send out surveys to current or former OkCupid users? I mean, like, that type of feedback alone could be invaluable to a company.
Well, Elizabeth, everything in life is an experiment, and businesses have the ethical responsibility to bring a safe and complete product to its consumers. The experiments conducted recently by Facebook and OkCupid are not only good things to do, research like this should be required by these and other large social media sites. For the first time in mankind's history, we can take our study of human psychology and sociology to the next level. With networks of millions or hundreds of millions of users, the amount of useful data that can be generated is priceless. We need to know how this new phenomenon truly affects the human psyche. There's clearly consent to these experiments in the terms and conditions, and now that the proverbial cat is out of the bag, continued use of these sites is not only further consent, it's proof that no one was harmed when the experiments were not publicly known about. Elizabeth, in science, there has to be some sort of control to ensure accuracy and consistency. Think of these experiments and those were unknowingly involved as the placebo effect. If users knew that they were part of this, the effects may be much different. In fact, the OkCupid study is proof of that. People who were not a good match for each other by the algorithm were told they were a good match. Their perception was such, so they in fact acted as perceived. If they had known they were being lied to, this data would have been useless. Don't you think research like this is vital to creating the best user experience possible on a website?
I guess my biggest issue, I want to know where exactly it says in the terms and conditions that my data is going to be used in psychological experiments. I do realize that telling people exactly what the experiment's about is could potentially render the data unusable. But you can't just mess with people's heads and not outright tell them. I mean, let's be honest, who actually reads the terms and conditions all the way through? I'm lucky if I skim the first page. Magical consent from terms and conditions is completely different than informed consent. When I was at Iowa State, I actually participated in several psychological studies because it gave me a little extra cash, since they would pay students who were willingly participate. I was never told exactly what was being done, but I at least knew that they were doing something. Most colleges that do any form of experimentation, the likes of what OkCupid and Facebook have done, at least have a generic consent form that you can fill out. If they're going to ask you to do something specific, they at least tell you. especially if it involves psychology or something like that, or even physical things. So that way, if you do have a condition that could be affected by whatever they choose, then you aren't going to have negative effects and you can back out of this study. I mean, for example, what if Facebook's experiments, they had filled someone's dashboard with extremely depressing news, as they allegedly did, and there's no telling what could have gone wrong. If somebody happened to have extreme depression or was feeling suicidal at that time, there's no telling what this barrage of depressing Facebook posts could have potentially done. It could have possibly pushed them over the edge or even caused them to commit suicide.
Well, Elizabeth, you are right. It doesn't spell out word for word that psychological experiments will be conducted in the user agreement, but you're also right that no one even reads them. So why is it that all of a sudden people care about that user agreement and what it says? Is it that you feel like Kyle on South Park and you're going to be turned into a human centipede? I mean, this testing is vital to see exactly what is happening in the human mind. The entire social media and online dating phenomena is less than 20 years old, really. This data is fresh, it's new, and it's vital to discovering what should and shouldn't be done with the internet in the future. It would be unethical at this time to not study the psychology and the sociology of this new phenomena and how it affects the human psyche. You know, informed consent is fine, but it would completely ruin some tests. The human mind is much more powerful when under suggestion. A true scientific test has to have certain control groups, or it's not good science at all. Ethically speaking, telling the participants about it in detail ahead of time, informed consent would make all the data null and void. This would be the wrong thing to do. Now, I do understand your concerns with Facebook filling threads with negativity. It could possibly catch the wrong person on the wrong day, the wrong way, and the next thing you know, there's a hostage situation or worse. Now, again, that does go to the power of suggestion and how powerful it can be. Negative thoughts breed negative results. So maybe the solution lies within the truth of where the situation is now. So every social media site can put up one last pop-up reminding users that this, that, or the other can be done with their data, yada, yada, yada. 95% of those users won't read that warning either, but at least everyone who continues to use the site is informed and consenting. What do you think? Would this be a good way to keep experiments secret for control purposes, but still inform the user of their possible participation?
I guess depending on how the users rule in terms of these experiments could really affect the future. I do like your idea. So if people decide that's okay, we could become subject to a barrage of extremely harmful testing that could have horrible results. But messing with people, and while messing with people's psychology without their consent is extremely unethical. But like you said, at the same time, there has to be a way for companies to gain this feedback, and it could open the doors for some interesting psychological studies. And so it maybe experiment in that you roll out new features to certain users and get their feedback. I guess I don't necessarily want to have them experimenting directly with the psychology, but I do see where you're coming from. Maybe don't change something to a social network in a social network feed so that all statuses are sad or all statuses are a certain type of emotion, but maybe do something to what Twitter does when they're thinking about rolling out updates. I know if you decide you want to experiment on a deeper level, my biggest issue is at least get the users informed consent.
Well, you know, I can agree with you on that, Elizabeth. Deep psychological testing should have some sort of control to prevent outbursts of rage or other negative effects, you know, from serious harming participants or the general public. But I still feel, however, that companies should disclose as little as possible to maintain the professional and scientific values.